Welcome to these TradeMalta webinars. As most of you know, at TradeMalta we are focused on assisting companies finding international opportunities and succeed in internationalization in general. We do this in various ways by helping companies financially with financial packages, but also by trying to provide knowledge and skills that companies based in Malta need to succeed internationally. This is what we're doing, and this is what the scope is of this series of webinars that we are starting today, and we will have one every week until the end of July. We will be typically inviting a speaker, an expert in a topic every week, and I'll tell you in a minute what topics we have coming up in the next weeks, and we will be essentially diffusing knowledge on a horizontal area or on an interesting country. These webinars are supported by our strategic partners, HSBC, and also by Studio 7 when it comes to the broadcasting side, for those of you who are listening to this after the live session. As I said, today is the first of the series of webinars. We have next week a webinar coming up on effective networking. We have digital marketing strategies on the 9th of July, a webinar on the market potential in Namibia, together with the High Commissioner of that sub-Saharan African country, on the 16th of July, and a very interesting session on supply chain and the future of trade finance options on the 23rd of July, delivered by an international strategist from HSBC. Before I introduce the speaker we have for today, I wanted to explain a little bit, some house rules in order to kind of maximize the time we have today and ensure we have some order. We are going to be recording the presentation side of the session, so I'll give over to the speaker in a few minutes, and we will be recording the session and broadcasting it on our social media after the session, only up to the presentation. So when you will be able to ask questions after the main presentation, that part is not recorded, and that will be therefore dealt with only in the live session. As participants throughout the main presentation and even after, feel free to post your questions. Our suggestion is to post your questions in the chat function of Microsoft Teams, and I will be able to read the questions when we'll have the question and answer session after the guest speaker. Feel free also to use the raise hands function of Microsoft Teams, but for most of the time we will be using the chat function for the questions. Please keep your audio on mute to be able to eliminate background noise. Today we have over 60 participants registered for this webinar, so obviously we want to eliminate all background noise in that sense. We will also try to send the presentation that we have today, so that's something else. And again, recording is supported by Studio 7, so thanks to our colleagues at Studio 7 as well. With us for the session of today, we have Dr. JJ Gatt. I'm really looking forward to this discussion on artificial intelligence and how being digital is really becoming essential for any company taking internationalization seriously nowadays. JJ, and I know JJ for a long time, had set up a web development and software company for 20 years. I think you've celebrated 20 years a few weeks ago. But then you've moved into artificial intelligence in the last few years. So the first question to you before I give you the floor for the actual presentation is, what happened? 20 years in development of software and web, and now AI.
Well, thank you, Joe. Good morning. It's great to be here, and it's great to see such a numerous set of people joining us in this webinar. Joe, I've always been interested in the intersection between communication and technology. I believe in the mission of helping companies understand their customers better and how to service them better. That has always been my drive. And AI has been a natural stepping stone, because we today have the technical capacity, which didn't exist only a few years ago, to automate processes which for us humans have been a huge stumbling block. I also believe in this mission of democratization of AI, which means bringing the benefits of artificial intelligence and technology in general, Joe, to companies of any size, those which are large and those which are small. It is a key misconception that artificial intelligence is only available to those companies which are huge. Joe, we can quote this report from McKinsey, which says that around 85% of all customer communication in the following years are likely to be automated and not human-driven, which shows this huge potential that we have to use technology for good, to make the concept of work far more enticing and to make businesses far more efficient. And that is the drive which led me to jump from traditional software into modern-day artificial intelligence.
Very, very interesting. So with that, essentially, I'm going to give the floor or the mic or the space to you for the presentation. Again, to our participants, feel free to send in questions in the chat function. I will be reading the questions to JJ later on, but feel free to send questions while he is doing the presentation. So over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, let's kick off right away. So TradeMalta asked me to speak principally about the concept of AI as a strategic tool for growth. And that's what I'll be doing for the next 45, 50 minutes or so. Thank you for your introduction, Joe. Good morning to all of you. I must mention that apart from being a technologist, my principal job is that of being a dad, and these are my two boys. I'm actually a lawyer by profession. My doctoral degree is in IT law. I built a number of tech companies in the past, but presently I'm the CEO of EBO, which is an AI company based in London with also some presence in Malta and other European states, and we work across three principal sectors: healthcare, financial services, and gaming. I'd also like to present how I'm going to structure today's presentation. So I'm going to be dividing it into these blocks. I'm going to start off with defining what artificial intelligence is, which often, Joe, is misconstrued. I will then move into trying to draw a picture about the impact that artificial intelligence is having on the business world today, and then go to the key question, which is, okay, fine, but should we bother at all with this tool? I'll then move to structuring how I believe that you can operationalize this knowledge, how you could take what you've heard in these 50 minutes and bring it to fruition within your companies. Lastly, we'll move to an FAQ section, as Joe explained, which will last about 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm excited to do this. Let's jump right into it, Joe. So let's start with the first bit. Let's define what artificial intelligence is. Now, the reason why I started off by saying I'm a dad is because just a few months ago, I was asked by my son's school to give a talk about artificial intelligence to 6-year-olds. And Joe, as you certainly know, that was quite a feat. How do you explain a complex technology function like artificial intelligence to 6-year-olds? And it's not an easy process. And if you look at this chart, which I'm showing now, which is called language acquisition norms, it explains at which age the human brain understands which language concepts. And as you certainly picked out already, you'll see that both the word artificial and the word intelligence are understood several years after age 6. In fact, intelligence is understood at age 8 and artificial is understood at around age 10. So how was I going to define AI for kids? I created my own little definition for the kids, which I'm going to share with you guys in today's webinar. This is my definition. So it's like when you make a computer with a little brain. You help it to learn by giving it words, and if the computer hears these words, let's say these inputs, it can quickly answer new questions on the same vein. Now, Joe, I must admit I cheated because the word computer is actually only understood by a child at around age 8, but I said, these are bright kids, let's throw it to them, and of course they did understand this definition. Now, the definition which I used at school for these kids is the operative definition that we will use in today's session. Of course, there is a formal definition, and you'll have it in the slides which Joe will be sending later on today. But when I was preparing for this school talk about artificial intelligence, it suddenly hit me that speaking to kids and defining artificial intelligence for kids is no different to defining artificial intelligence for CEOs, for politicians, for boards. Everything needs to be explained in clear and simple terms. In fact, it is our duty to remove the hype around AI and break it down into very basic concepts which are understood by all and sundry. Whether you are a 6-year-old kid with a lot of energy in a classroom or whether you are a 60-year-old politician. And in fact, the following week after this event at the school, I had a debate with the former Prime Minister of Greece, Dr. George Papandreou, and I essentially repeated the exact same definition. And Joe, you wouldn't believe it, but I got the same type of questions from the audience about artificial intelligence. You know, will it take our job? Will we ever be able to marry an AI robot? And so on and so forth. So this is the operative definition which we are going to be using in this session. And allow me to take this a step further, right? We spoke about George Papandreou in Greece. Let's move to the eastern neighbor of Cyprus. And let's go through this story, which I think really unfolds the definition of AI for today. So I'd like you all to look at this picture, which I'm showing on the screen, a beautiful piece of art. So Pygmalion is a legendary Cypriot figure. He's a sculptor, right? You'll see him in orange in this picture on the right. Now, the poet Ovid, around 2,000 years ago, recounts how Pygmalion declared that he was just not interested in woman whatsoever. Quite a bold statement, I guess. So he sculpted this very beautiful woman, Venus, right? On the festival of Venus, actually, he wished that this statue would become human, would change into his bride so he could marry her. And indeed, Venus granted his wish, and he did marry her. This is the rendition by Rodin, of course, which is at the Met, of the same event, right? Pygmalion and Galatea, which is the name of the statue of his bride. Galatea is essentially ancient artificial intelligence, right? 2,000-year-old artificial intelligence. She's essentially non-organic material, right, marble, crafted by humans, and in the end, functions almost like a human being, which is exactly what artificial it is, right? It's like when you get a computer, make it seem like it's got a tiny brain, so it can itself take certain decisions or answer certain questions. So it's funny how history repeats itself, right? Because Ovid, 2,000 years ago, essentially touched on today's central debate about artificial intelligence, the ethics of artificial intelligence, the capabilities of artificial intelligence, and how humans can interact with AI in their daily lives, which is something we are going to be speaking quite a lot about today. Let's zoom forward from Pygmalion and Ovid, and let's start moving closer to the year 2000. So this is 1997, and it's New York, right? It's a contemporary story, and it's the first time where IBM's Deep Blue supercomputer, right, the first fragment of AI, if you wish, that we had, beat the reigning chess grandmaster, a guy called Garry Kasparov. As you are seeing here in the picture, you all know how this ended, and it wasn't too good for us humans, right? As this 1997 Newsweek cover ominously explained. It's perhaps a tad scary, but it is the first inkling that we had that artificial intelligence is actually quite a powerful thing. So let's now jump forward 20 years into the present day, and let's look at the impact that this technology, this artificial intelligence has in the business world and the social world that we live in today. I'll start off by picking a first example from law, which is my academic profession. When you think about concepts like taxation, you'd be surprised to understand how deeply artificial intelligence is rooted in the entire economic model of tax. We use AI to automate particular processes within taxation. We use it to better identify tax evasions, which is a useful skill to have. But we also use it to forecast the burden of tax. As I mentioned earlier, EBO is a London-based company, and in the COVID period, Joe, I was really interested to see that the government in the UK was using an AI model to forecast the tax burden that pubs would have once they reopen, and on top of that, they overlaid climate data. So how will weather affect people walking into the pub, what is the likely income they will generate, and what would be the tax burden coming out of that income. And this AI model helped government formulate public policy around when or if and how do we reopen the economy post-COVID. So AI starts influencing public policy. It starts influencing societal decisions. And talking about tax, I'll just show a deeper inkling for just one moment from China. China is an extremely interesting country, especially when looking at what's going on in the COVID space. So they've got a tax system in China which is aptly called the golden tax system. It's built by a company called the Aizino Corporation. Anyway, so they built this AI model which basically merges a large amount of data sets that the government is capable of ingesting, of collecting. So they, for example, ingest social media feeds, pictures that you may upload on different social media channels. And they basically use a model to be able to tell whether the lavish lifestyle that you display on social media channels is well matched to your tax computation. So if you're declaring minimum wage income, but then you're posting many pictures of owning a particular super yacht, that's obviously going to flag a problem in the system, and then you'll probably receive some type of tax inspection. So the underreporting of revenue in China is now almost down to zero because they've really tightened the loop through artificial intelligence in being able to understand concepts in live expression and how that relates to tax evasion. And this precision, and I'll speak quite a lot today about this concept of precision, is incredible because it's far better than what human tax agents could ever do. And not simply from a computational perspective, apologies, but also because there is no bias, right? One of the biggest difficulties that humans present in an economic environment is the knowledge of other humans, which often creates bias, which is incorrect, whilst AI often is devoid of that. Let's just give some more examples of impact. Some of you have heard of the Press Association, one of the most important news writing entities in Europe. Do you know, Joe, that they actually create 30,000 news reports every month, which are entirely written by artificial intelligence. They've got a project which is called Radar, which means reporters and data and robots, which actually uses a technique called NLP, or natural language processing, which is able to think about stories and write them. I'm quite sure that half the stories that you all read in sports, which is a very linear matter, or even financial news, is not written by a human reporter, although it might be signed off by one, but is probably written by AI. That is the pervasiveness and the impact of the technology today. Let's look at another area for which Malta has a keen interest, which is the maritime sector, right? Our territorial waters. Gone are the days where governments send out military vessels to patrol the particular territorial jurisdiction. It's very expensive to do, it's extremely risky, and there are few people who want to do it. So most countries today license a technology, an AI technology built by Google, which takes 22 million data points every day from satellites on orbit, which uses an AI technique which is called pattern recognition, to look at the movement of ships, of vessels in the sea. And that movement through AI is able to be interpreted in, is this illegal fishing? is this illegal entry into a territorial zone which is prohibited. So we've entirely eradicated the physical patrolling of our borders, and we've replaced that with an AI tool. When you realize that AI is basically managing the sovereignty of our states, you see how deeply it becomes embedded in our political and economic and, of course, commercial functions. And here are some more examples of impact. And this is one from our projects in the UK, which EBO does. So we've developed a virtual agent for the NHS, for the public health system in the UK, called Cora. Right. Cora is a virtual agent built using artificial intelligence, which holds intelligent conversations between the patient and the healthcare provider, right, at a hospital. And it allows the self-management by patients of their needs. So one of the biggest problems in the UK, and I'm certain that this also applies in Malta, are people who do not attend their medical appointment, even though it's been scheduled for them. Joe, I'll mention just this figure. It costs almost $250 million per annum to the British government of missed appointments. Now, when you look at the root cause of this problem, it's not that the patient doesn't need the medical appointment or doesn't care about it, but very often they forget, or their life situation means that they cannot attend. Right? Maybe their parent is unwell or so on and so forth. But because the previous system was so analog, the only way you can inform a hospital that you're not attending is by making a call, which often means a 40-minute telephone wait, only available between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Most people just didn't bother to inform the healthcare provider that they won't make it, so they just don't attend. So through AI, we entirely eradicated that process, and we automated it by allowing a patient on any social media channel, be it Facebook Messenger, be it WhatsApp, Skype, you name it, able to authenticate him or herself with the hospital to know that you are indeed you, and manage their entire appointment cycle. I need to cancel it, I can't make it, can I move it to a following week, without involving a human. And Joe, this is critical because in a COVID type of world, call centers often break down because people don't want to be bulked in a particular room running a function. But secondly, in a COVID period, but even in a standard economic growth scenario, the scale up of requests is far higher than humans can manage. And here is an example from the gaming sector, which is identical. The moment you have a sporting event like a World Cup or like Wimbledon, the amount of incoming inquiries which hit your core functions is so huge, often 10, 15 times your standard scale, that it can't be handled by humans. And the benefit of bringing in AI is also that it offers cost reduction. So Joe, in most of our projects throughout Europe, when we bring in an AI element that can automate a workflow, we often see the cost of that workflow go down from something like €2 for a particular workflow completion to just 30 cents. That is a huge economic impact. That's the difference between a company making it or not, right? So let's just give one further example before we close off this section. And let's go back full circle to sculpture, right? We spoke about Ovid and Pygmalion 2,000 years ago. So what you're seeing on screen right now is a sculpture called Deo. Joe, this was not built by any human artisan. There was no person who was sculpting or forming this mold. This, Joe, is the first piece of art which was entirely created by artificial intelligence. The AI tool understood the means of production, the means of inspiration, and created this particular form of art, which opens a very interesting discussion about creativity. Is AI creative? And this is an important point for us to touch on, not simply because of the economic impact of creativity, right? We've got entire industries which are based on creativity, production of music, the production of movies, Netflix. But it's also about thinking that creativity is a derivative state of consciousness. So saying that AI is creative is attributing a large amount of cognitive ability to this tool. We all know the famous Alan Turing, the most important computer scientist in Britain, who always said that the question of creativity can be reduced to this: can a computer surprise us? Well, if Alan Turing were alive and if he had to see this sculpture, I would certainly say yes, this sculpture does surprise us, does interest, and therefore does show that AI can combine concepts into a new form of art, which is, at least to some extent, surprising. And reflecting about this, I'd like to point you to an interesting book. I'll be doing a few of these book references throughout today's presentation. This is one written by Stuart Armstrong, and it's called Smarter Than Us. And he says that it isn't just that computers or AI are better than us in certain domains, but it's that they're phenomenally, incomparably better than us, and the edge that we've lost will never be regained. Now, this opens a large discussion about AI and philosophy, which, Joe, I'd love to do, but perhaps in a different webinar. But of course, it makes us ask these fundamental questions. What is better, and what makes better better? And what is the role of education in creating the right jobs and students of tomorrow? So the third part of today's presentation is going to focus on this key business question. So I hear a lot of you asking me, JJ, okay, you've defined AI, you've made a case for its impact, in policy, in economic activity, but should we bother, or should we perhaps ignore this and maybe wait for another wave to come by? And this is a central topic, which I think is often on the minds of many boards, right? So let's tackle this right away. I'd like you to look at this slide, which is research from Deloitte, and it basically is showing the profit margin index for private banks in Europe, okay, across the last 20 years. So what you'll realize by looking closely at this chart is that in the last 20 years, private banking has eroded essentially 50% of the profit margin it once had. So why are we seeing this slump in a lot of economic sectors, but banking is perhaps one good example? Well, many reasons have been provided, right? In the case of banking, we can speak about increased competition, we could talk about subprime lending problems, but I think Moody's has it right when they say the key and fundamental problem in banking and in business today is many companies have yet to capitalize on the opportunities which are offered through innovation and tech advancement. And obviously AI is one of the key technologies which gives this ability to create innovation, to create advancement within an organization. And it's no surprise that the analyst Gartner has said that probably from the year 2020, 85% of all customer interactions, whether they be in retail, in healthcare, in public service, or in other divisions, will be managed without a human. Now, this is spectacular. I mean, when you look at this statistic, now whether it is technically accurate or not is almost irrelevant because it's an indication of a trajectory, right? What we're seeing over here is a changing world which is quickly evolving towards automation and pro-automation thinking. And it's no surprise for those of you who have studied psychology is that the Maslow's pyramid of needs, right, the famous Maslow's pyramid of needs, which often talks about a basic concept like food, water, and shelter, has now been modified, perhaps in joke, to include the concepts of Wi-Fi and battery as being fundamental elements for survival. AI is unlike any previous technology that we've had before. And one of the things which is interesting is that it is the type of technology, Joe, that just disappears. And this is the truth about the most profound technologies that hit human history, right? They disappear. They become unable to see. The truth is, there is no big sticker or label saying AI inside. Netflix doesn't tell you that it's using AI to predict what next movie you should watch. Amazon doesn't declare that it is using artificial intelligence to mine your profile to determine the next book that you might want to read and put a particular personalized discount to attract you to buy it, right? AI is invisible. In the same way that these spectacles that I am wearing, eyeglasses, they're just a tool which becomes invisible and allows me to see the world through it. AI, in fact, is less of a tool and more of an approach to doing business. Just like spectacles allow you to see the world, AI allows you to see opportunities in everyday life and in everyday business decisions. And it's spectacular to see this historical change. In this little movie which you're seeing now that I put together, you're seeing the top brands change from the year 2000 to the year 2020. Look at how Coke, which was right at the top, now starts receding. And which are the companies who have the highest brand value, the highest brand equity, the highest market cap? Well, the only 4 companies which are today investing in artificial intelligence: Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, which are the 4 main AI drivers in the world today. And it's incredible when you see this, fast-paced change, right, in this movie. And it's good that we speak about change in today's webinar, Joe, because I think it's less about artificial intelligence. In truth, it's more about change, right? It's about how technology requires us as business leaders to change our perspectives about decision. And Joe, change can be extremely tricky. So let's go through this little game together. I'd like you all sitting at your desks, looking at your laptops, to really glue your eyes closely into this picture. So this is 1910. It's 5th Avenue in New York, right? It's clearly a very busy day, a lot of people on the street, a lot of horse-driven carts. There are about, maybe I'd say, 100 horse-driven carts in this picture. Now look closely. Can you see the single and solitary car in this road? Okay, I'll point it out. It's here, right? So we're seeing a ratio of about 1 car to 99 or 100 horses, right? Now, this is a very important period in American development, right? Henry Ford is creating his first Model T in Detroit, which of course became extremely popular. It was the technology of the time, if you wish, the AI of the time. Okay, let's fast forward 12 months. This is the same road, 5th Avenue, at a lower angle view, right? And we're seeing the inverse proportion. We're seeing around 99 or 100 cars. And now look closely once again. Can you see the horse? Well, I'll point it out. It's here. Right? A huge change a century ago in just 1 year. Now, the most important analysis of this story is not about the speed of change. Of course, that's relevant, but it's also quite superficial, right? I think the key question which we need to ask ourselves around change is, why did this period represent the biggest period of poverty in American history? And why was it that all the horse drivers who had all the assets to change, so they had access to the market, they knew the customers, they had access to the vendors from which they used to pick up goods, they also had internalized in their minds Google Maps, right? They knew all the fastest routes. So they had all the assets to be successful. But one technology got introduced and they were stubborn. They said, no, I won't get my Ford T, I'll keep driving my cab and my carriage, my horse, right? Why was that? Why did they not embrace the technology, use all the assets which they had, and become successful in a new environment? Were they stubborn? Did they not see the writing on the wall? Did they not see that the assets they had, access to market intelligence, vendor relationships, coupled with the new technology, would have made them successful? They didn't. Why? Well, I think this is the central theme today. It's because we often define ourselves and our companies by what we already do, right? Change is so hard for us on an individual basis, so hard for us as a nation, so hard for us as a global community, right? And I think we need to focus on change, because in the same way that the horse drivers had this big technology challenge ahead of them, and those which were able to embrace it or not were the ones which failed or otherwise, we too have that same change question ahead of us. And let's talk not simply about the imperative of change, let's talk about the speed of change, right? It took us, Joe, about 5,000 years to go from the tablet on the left, right, our Egyptian hieroglyphics, to the tablet on the right, our Amazon Kindle. It took us 5,000 years to do that. But it only took us about 70 years in radiology to do X-rays in this manner, to X-rays or CT scans in this manner, right? So it's not just about the necessity of change, it is the speed at which we are able to adapt to that change. Joe, we now change our smartphones every year, and the smartphone in your pocket or on your desk is about 1,000 times more powerful than the computer we used to land Apollo 11 on the moon in 1969, right? That is the rapidity of change. We speak about self-driving cars as though it's a dream. In California, it is now part of state legislation to allow autonomous driving, and in Europe too. In most parts of central, continental, even northern Europe, Germany is the pioneer here, we have large areas which allow autonomous vehicles, usually containers, to actually be driven autonomously on the road. So we need to focus on this concept. The acceleration in change and in growth is huge. I mean, this graph is showing you a 600-year history. Look what speed looks like, you know, going from Gutenberg's printing press in the 1400s to the first 3D chip. We are doubling the speed of change of what we do every 18 months. And of course, for all of you who follow technology, this is known as Moore's law, right? And I'd like to speak a little bit more about change and the rapidity of it before we drop the subject. And here's a personal story. I was really privileged to mentor the first hackathon in the Vatican, which was organized by the Holy See, which brought together some of the best PhDs, the best minds in the world, to use AI technology for social good, right? The normative aspect of technology. We had the best students from all over the world. Most of these guys were on their second PhD and still in their 20s. My team was a team put together by MIT, Georgetown, Washington, and Harvard. You know, brilliant kids. In 3 days only, 3 days, the winning team was able to build a VR goggle which assisted children with dyslexia to read. By using an AI tool, we call it computer vision, to read a script, to read a book, to understand the rhythmic nature of reading, and to vibrate in the back of the cerebral cortex the speed, the rhythm at which the text should be read. And that empirically showed that people suffering from dyslexia were able to read more proficiently without the difficulties that disease often shows. So it's incredible that in 3 days, a couple of 20-year-old kids were able to speedily put together a proof of concept about technology. And this change, Joe, is changing society, and we must bother about it. And for those of you who are following the very bizarre American presidential campaign, some of you may have seen this candidate. His name is Zoltan Istvan, who is running his political campaign purely on AI. His title, his slogan, his political slogan is Upgrading America, because he believes that it is now time to start embedding AI, silicon chips, within the human body to improve our cognitive functions. This is not new, right? You know, implanting biomedical devices, anything from cochlear ear implants to improve our hearing, is something that has been happening for many years. But he's going a step further, and he's saying the main political agenda today should be using AI to make us better humans. So when he says upgrading America, what he actually means is upgrading us. And if this isn't enough to convince you that we need to bother about this topic, well, I don't know what will be. But for those of you who are following today's webinar and hail from the segment of manufacturing, I'd like to talk about the concept of lights out manufacturing. So what does this mean? In a production environment, like for example the assembly of cars or the manufacturing of paint, we often know that we use AI in a robotic process to automate that particular chain. Right? We don't use humans anymore who use, screwdrivers and hammers to put together cars. We use robotic arms. So in most states within China, but also within America, the argument has been made, if in 18 hours of the day we've got robots in our plant who are building our deliverables. Why do we need electricity? Should we not take out the lights and have a lights out manufacturing scenario because AI doesn't need to see? Now, this is not impressive simply because of the way we're thinking about cost saving, but because of something that the World Economic Forum in its last Davos report started to think about, which is who is really adapting to who? Is it humans that adapt to AI or AI that adapts to human? And this is very important for our evolution as a race, but also for the way we structure our businesses going forward. So in this report, the World Economic Forum found that in 2018, in 30% of the time, it was AI doing the job, and in about 71% of the time, it was humans doing it. As a result, clearly, AI needs to adapt to the needs of the human being. But it's predicting that by 2025, we would have reached the pinnacle whereby AI will have a more important say in the production process, doing more than 50%. And the question which they ask is, well, should humans now start adapting to the needs of AI? And what does that say about developing a business? Clearly, all of you in today's webinar are probably business leaders. You don't want to plan for where we are today in 2020. You want to plan strategically for where your organization should be in 2025. So who are you going to be adapting to in 5 years from now? I think this is a pertinent subject to also touch in today's day and age. Joe, Forbes covered some work which my company EBO does in the UK with the NHS, I've mentioned earlier, and they researched 2,000 patients in the UK. And what they found from their sample is that nearly 3/4 of the population, 76% of the British population, would rather speak to our AI-driven virtual agents than have to wait 45 minutes on the phone and speak to a human on the other line Monday to Friday, 9 to 1. And I'm not surprised, because we live in the culture of convenience and instant gratification, where we want an answer now. And we're doing these type of projects, Joe, also locally. We've had a great project for BNF Bank and others, where the entire concept of product manual, call history, automation and call center management is becoming the rule of the day. Okay, let's move to the last segment, Joe, of today's webinar. I'd like to, close off this part, this last 10-15 minutes perhaps, to discuss artificial intelligence as a strategic tool, which is indeed today's topic, and which I'm sure is a key question that we all have on our minds. In other words, how do we operationalize AI? How do we drive the message, which I've tried to drive in the last 45 minutes, and bring it to the front lines of our businesses, whether they are small businesses or large? Okay, I think there are 7 key ideas or 7 key tips or take-home points that I'd like to put forward. Let's break them down. Okay, the first one is this. I think we need to start off with this huge cultural shift as business leaders, as business owners, as business managers. And we need to stop thinking of ourselves as traditional companies. I am a hotel company. I am a cabs company. I am a farmhouse rental company. We are all tech companies. Tech is no longer an individual vertical created by individuals who sell hardware or software. Technology is an enabling tool. If you are a hotel, your ability to engage with the market, right, through digital marketing, through search engine optimization, your ability to AI to forecast and predict pricing, to keep tabs on your competitors' pricing, to offer personalized discounts to people based on particular social or demographic patterns, that is going to be your key competitive factor. And you could only achieve this if you stop thinking of yourself as a hotel, a hospital, a cab company, and start thinking of yourselves about as a technology company. I had a very interesting conversation with a local business leader whom I respect very much, Matthew Bedzina, the CEO of eCabs, and he says we are not a cab company, we are a digital company, which is also a concept which is echoed by Uber in the States and elsewhere. And he's right. This is the first cultural shift that we need to start by accepting. And I'm not surprised that in a recent study by MIT, 84% of respondents said that AI will enable them to either obtain or sustain competitive advantage. Of course that is correct. That is because we are seeing it as an opportunity to get to the real business value, to the real competitive business needs that we have as organizations. Okay, a second key concept. I want to talk about price, right? We often forget how radically technology gets cheaper over time. Price is plummeting constantly. Now, the reason why I used a light bulb in today's slide is because sometimes we forget that the light bulb became ubiquitous, became sold and available in every household, not when it was invented, which is when the technology, became so popular. Of course, it was much safer, more controllable when compared to candles or oils, but that is not what made it popular. No one bought the light bulb when it was invented. What made the light bulb ubiquitous is when its price plummeted, right? The cost of illumination has fallen 400-fold in the last 80 years alone, Joe. And so what makes technology ubiquitous is its price positioning. Likewise, the cost of implementing artificial intelligence is plummeting. That which was inaccessible to your companies just a few months ago is actually accessible now. So you really need to keep an eye on the price point and challenge the understanding that boards of directors often have that AI is only available to organizations with large coffers and deep financial resources. Okay, I'd like to talk about the third function, the third take-home point, and I'm going to talk about predictions. Okay, so Google search bar predicts what I am going to search next. I've started typing the first few letters and it just predicted and completed my entire sentence, right? Amazon is predicting what book I'd like to buy next. Spotify is predicting what tune I am likely to enjoy listening to. So predictions are a forecast of the future. Now, in commercial terms, this is critical. I think it is literally the most important change to the business model that we have today. So think about this. So, if AI can predict every medical event that you are likely to go through over the next 5 to 10 years, what is the need of insurance? Do you need to insure against an event that you know is going to help? If AI is capable of predicting employee behavior or employee fit in an organization, how likely am I to hire this person versus that person? Do I need the traditional function of an HR department? Or maybe if AI can help me identify the weaknesses that predictively a new employee might have, my induction process might change to focus on the weakness which AI is helping me predict. And there is a great book about AI and predictions which I'd recommend to you, which is published by Harvard Press, one of the best publishers around, which is called Prediction Machines. I think you'll really enjoy this, because it really makes the case that the ability to predict is the pinnacle of business success in the coming decade. Okay, fourth principle of 7. I'd like to speak briefly about the law, not because I'm a lawyer by profession, but because I want to illustrate how critically AI is changing operating models in business. So just a few years ago, the EU Parliament discussed incorrectly a motion about giving legal personality to robots. It's absolutely, bizarre. It has since been defeated. But there was this discussion about whether, for example, if you employ a robot in your factory as an owner, you should be liable to pay social security for the robot worker. There was a discussion on whether we should ascribe legal personality to AI tools. So legal personality is a very critical business function, right? Because it gives you the ability to sue or be sued, right? So we started also thinking about concepts of tort or liability. So for example, if I am going to use an artificial intelligence tool in my HR department to sift through the 300 CVs that I receive. And this tool is going to help me match the top 5 candidates that I should actually call in for an interview out of the many which I am impossible to meet. So could that exclusion of the other 295 candidates create some type of liability, perhaps a discriminatory case against me? What type of ethical principles is the AI using to make that selection? So there's a lot of this legal discussion which is going on around AI. It's hugely interesting also from an academic perspective. And I think in business, you've seen the first inkling of this come in through Article 22 of the GDPR regulation, which has been put into force only recently, right? The GDPR Article 22 actually says that a data subject, you and I out there, the citizen, the end user, has the right to object from automated decision making, right? This is the first inkling which the law is giving us, that a person can say, look, I know you as a bank are using as an AI tool to calculate my risk and therefore decide whether to give me this loan or not. But I'm sorry, I will not accept that process, and it needs to be done by a human. Now, this doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be any different, but it means the law is protecting the process of human agency and human control. And we're starting to see the first elements of legislation also in Malta. Only last June, exactly this time last year, the European Commission published a seminal piece, an excellent document about ethics guidelines for building trustworthy AI. I'm sure eventually this will be codified into some form of regulatory structure. And in Malta, this government has published a consultation paper on the strategy for AI and now has a national AI strategy for the implementation of AI in business and in government. So it shows the pervasiveness of AI and things that we need to look out for as business owners. Okay, the 5th recommendation of 7. This is a question which I always get and perhaps might also be on the minds of some of you listening today. I think we should be clear about the fact, Joe, that some jobs will go, right? I'm sure that others will be created, but we need to understand that some jobs will be lost. Just before today's webinar, I was chatting with a very good friend of mine, Richard, who said, but will AI ever be able to negotiate complex social relationships, right, amongst communities, or even be creative? Well, I think the answer for the time being is probably AI cannot negotiate complex social relationships, but it's already starting to show the cognitive ability to be creative. So it is certain that job erosion will occur as a result. I predict that the low-skilled jobs today are likely to be eradicated within the next 3 years. So usually this is about 15% of any economic jurisdiction, any workforce base, and that's huge. I mean, in Malta, 15% of the working population is 45,000 people. In the US alone, that's 13 million jobs which are likely to be eradicated. So which jobs, well, in my view, are likely to go? Well, classic call centers, I think they're a thing of the past. News reporting, I think, linear news reporting is a thing of the past. Joe, a subject which I know is close to your heart, I think teaching and education is not a thing of the past, but the method in which we do this, and COVID has certainly shown it, is likely to change. I think accountants are likely to be a thing of the past. The big 4 today are the most avid users of AI technology. I was in London visiting the EY tower just before COVID, and the director there told me, we employ in EY, right, which was previously a traditional accountancy and audit firm, per capita, we employ more AI data scientists than Google does in London. Unbelievable, right? A firm which was previously in traditional financial services. But yes, I think cashiers, till managers, those jobs are going to go, Joe. So we need to think today, what does education mean and what does a job mean? Well, for me, I think employability is less about what you already know and what you've already learned in your educational past, and more about your capacity to learn, your capacity to adapt. And that's bringing in a whole discussion about continuous professional development. I think we need to ask ourselves as employers, what reskilling do we need to do within our organization in the next 5 years? If you're ignoring reskilling, that's wrong. What impact on salary levels is AI going to have? Is it going to drive it down, or is it going to require that in other areas we employ higher skilled, higher earning individuals? And how do you manage performance? Often I get HR managers which say, look, we've got a call center with 700 people and an AI tool. Their performance is just not comparable. How do I do assessments in today's day and age, right? So we need to be thinking as employers about that concept, and a great book about that is by the Oxford professor Nick Bostrom, who I had the pleasure to meet at the Vatican, in fact, a book called Superintelligence, which actually talks about how superintelligence is changing the economic dynamics of the world in education and in mainstream business. Okay, the last 2 points which I'd like to focus on. The first one is about the necessity that we have as businesses, as employers, to create a compelling experience, a compelling virtual workplace for our employees. What you're seeing on screen right now is really interesting. It's a research which is done every year by a company called Gallup, a pollster which you certainly have all heard about. So they measure the state of engagement on the workplace. So they've got 3 metrics, Joe, which is those employees which are engaged, who are not engaged, and those who are actively disengaged. In other words, they're literally frustrating the work dynamics. And they look at that on a country-by-country basis. I'm quoting from their 2017 report, Joe. Did you know that in the case of Italy, which doesn't appear in this specific graphic because it didn't fit in this screen, and France, which does in fact appear in this screen, 90% of the employed workforce is either not engaged or actively disengaged in their job, which spells disaster to the economic model, because essentially you're looking at an unproductive block. So I think it is our responsibility as employers to look at those tasks which we give to our employees, which are damning in nature, which are creating this result. So repetitive process which don't feed our soul. I don't know how to put it in any other way, but giving a compelling experience, an intellectually stimulating experience to our employees, whatever level they are on, is critical. Now this is the case for AI, because today we know that around half of the work activities which we have could be automated using existing technology. So I'm not talking about science fiction, an AI tool which is yet to be discovered. I'm talking about technology which is already on the market today, Joe. And if half of what we do is repetitive and could be automated, why are we not doing that? And retraining our employees at a higher level of skill to perform functions which are closer to our human cognitive ability, right? Okay, and the last point, and we'll pause here and open our Q&A. I must say that you need to wrestle with AI, right? You need to wrestle with it. Yes, we have a concept in artificial intelligence which is called the productivity paradox. What that means is that often there are high expectations about AI, and a week, a month, maybe 2 months after you employ AI into your company and you're really happy and you've uncorked the champagne, you actually realize that your productivity has dipped. And that is what we call the productivity paradox, because just like with many technology advancements, it is the long tail which brings the productivity advantage and not the short term. So you are all into a long game here, which you need to play. And there are 4 concepts which I'd like to bring an end with to help you wrestle with the productivity paradox. The first one, you need to be thinking strategically. You need to look at the big picture. You need to see the global trends. And a lot of what TradeMalta and HSBC are doing in these webinars is exactly helping to sharpen that strategic ability. The second thing, you need to experiment. Yes, you need to be agile with technology. There are many tools out there. EBO is one of them, of course, but there are a plethora. You need to start small with a very defined scope, prove value, and grow. That's exactly what experimentation is about. The third concept, I think it's time for boards of directors, for companies to start thinking about more specialized skills. Unfortunately, these are not easily available in Malta, but I'm surprised when I meet large companies whose board of director doesn't have a technology thinker, someone who's focusing on change management and transformation, people who can be data scientists, look at patterns and trends. We need to start employing these type of skill sets. And lastly, I think reading, right? Reading is so critical to the formation of the human mind. I was also bantering about this with some of the people in the studio before we started, right? Voracious reading to help in reskilling. And here are two interesting books which I'll put to you. The first one is by a very interesting historian, Israeli historian called Yuval Harari. He published this book called Homo Deus, and he argues that now that we've raised humanity, right, above the beastly level of survival, it's time for us to upgrade humans almost into gods, right, through AI. This is a very controversial book, but it just shows the potential of disruption that AI has in the world today. He's almost arguing that natural selection, right, and the whole Darwinism that we've professed for the last couple of years should be morphed into intelligent design, should be an AI-driven selection process. Again, going back to where we started today's presentation, you know, bringing the inorganic into organic. And the last book, which should not sound like an advert because it's not, but which I co-authored, is actually a book published, it's an academic book published by Professor Marianne Lowry and Father Joseph Borch, which actually looks at the changing landscape of the Maltese economy. And I authored the chapter about AI and technology. Now, this book may be relevant because it's specifically about Malta, which often is not the case where we tend to see studies which have more of an international dimension. Okay, so let's conclude. I'd like to conclude with this simple statement which brings together a lot of what we've said in the last 60 minutes or so, Joe. This is a quote from one of my favorite authors, Robert Persing. He's an American philosopher, of course, famous for his book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I hope many of you have read. In this book, talking about engineering, he actually says, if you run from technology, it will chase you. So to the hypothesis that Joe put earlier, you know, do we ignore this technology? Is it just a fad? It will chase you, right? AI adds a new strategic level within your organization. So you need to focus on that. You need to do so with some speed and agility. You need to do so by retraining the talent within your organization. You need to do so with a positive culture to disrupt traditional approaches that we have in the market. And it's all about setting this new framework, right? This new thought framework, Joe, in business to embrace AI. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Let's open the Q&A, Joe.
TJ, thanks a lot. This is really, fascinating. At the same time, while, listening to you, raising a number of issues on a number of, aspects of our economy and of our lives, I also have some questions, but kind of there's some common themes in here. For example, while it's fascinating on the one hand, it can be a bit, intimidating. Do you have and can you share with us a couple of examples of how companies, perhaps, SMEs or, relatively small companies, not necessarily micro enterprises, but small companies, have used AI in reality to engage, especially in international business, because that's what we do at TradeMalta?
Absolutely. Also, it's worth noting, Joe, that there are also state aids in the COVID period, which the government is putting forward, particularly to assist in the internationalization through the use of technology. And maybe this is some data that you'll be able to share later with our audience. Yes, so I think there are two layers to your question. So the first one is it scary? Well, what's scary, Joe, is not change, but it is the resistance to change. That is what scares me. I've never been quite scared about the ability to make changes. That's how we live and we thrive as an organization. So I think as businesses, it is the reluctance to change which should scare us rather than change itself. As long as change is well managed and always put in, not because it's a fancy thing to do, but because it has clear business value, because it has a business objective which it is helping us to achieve. Of course, Joe, I'll give a typical example, but perhaps two of them. Okay, the first one hails from the insurance industry. So we do a lot of work in the financial services sector in Europe. Obviously, London is the biggest market. We also have some projects in Malta here for large firms, Mapfre, Gazan, etc. So one of the things that COVID has made critically clear is that citizens customers want to engage digitally. The digital divide, which we often spoke about, those who are over 60 who might have less, is very, very, very thin and is less real than it was perhaps 15, 20 years ago. We've seen a huge surge hitting digital channels of organizations which are totally unable to handle that inbound load. So what we've done in a number of projects is actually utilize artificial intelligence to understand human language, match it to a body of answers, processes or work practices, and fulfill that particular business process which is necessary without the involvement of a human agent. This not only reduces the operational cost, but it mitigates the risk of an organization when it needs to scale or very quickly dip. Let's now talk about internationalization and how AI can help there. One of the key steps in internationalization, Joe, relates to market research. So I need to invest, I need to export my product into a territory which I have no contacts in, I have no resellers, vendors, affiliates, I have little market intelligence about. Artificial intelligence today, Joe, mines a lot of data points, anything from economic models to social information, to create new levels of market intelligence, which are available at a fragment of the price previously available 15, 20 years ago from market analysts like Gartner and others, and make them available to the average SME for a pittance. This market intelligence strategically is often the difference between a mission that fails or a mission that succeeds. Because of course the preparation and the understanding of the dynamics and cultural sensitivity of the export market is absolutely critical in strategy formulation. And the plummeting of the price of the report is exactly what I spoke about in the bulb analogy earlier on. This intelligence is available not only at a slight fee, but in real time. I remember the days when I wanted to understand an economic sector in Italy. I'd get a report from the previous year, which was published 6 months ago. With AI today, the data patterns and data points give us real-time, daily information about what the market looks like. And Joe, that's critical, because if we're investing in a digital marketing campaign, we want to make sure that it's as sharpened and fine-tuned as possible to the sentiment in the market today, and not that which we saw in a report last year. So here are some ideas on the accessibility of the tool, the price of the tool, and its usefulness.
Something else related to this, but also to your presentation. You mentioned prediction before, but kind of my understanding is that prediction and the models one works on and using AI in this sense would have to do, or would have the main benefit is essentially on a business to consumer level. When I'm trying to understand the consumers better, and therefore that prediction helps in, that understanding and prediction, they kind of go together. A lot of the companies based in Malta that we assist at TradeMalta engage in a business-to-business level. Is AI for them as well, or is it mostly a business-to-consumer phenomenon?
I think that's a great question, Joe, so thank you for putting it forward. The concepts of automation and prediction are more easily explained in a B2C environment, which is what we chose to do today, but are equally applicable in a B2B environment. So let's think about organizations that are selling to other businesses and have a set of processes which are necessary for the fulfillment of their particular value chain. Automating part of that value chain, being able to supply procurement processes which are cheaper, or vendors which have different offering through AI on a constant basis, totally changes the competitiveness of that organization. So that is an automation model which provides internal competitiveness, which in turn reflects on better B2B performance, but prediction too. So often the success, the competitive success of an organization in a B2B environment relates to two things: the timeliness of the sale and the price of the sale. So the timeliness means, when do you pitch it to the other organization, right? And the second one is, at what price do you do so? Today, AI can help us keep tabs on both of these elements. I'll touch briefly on them both to be as pragmatic as possible. In the oil and gas industry, AI is used to predict the price at which a barrel is likely to sell in the future, and so what decisions we need to take on stock today. Just by looking at that model, that predictive model, your whole supply chain is reshaped. You've understood whether you should store, whether you should sell, whether you should increase the first few steps in the supply process, whether you should employ more people because predictively you are going to have an upwind in 2 or 3 months' time. And it changes the entire timing and pricing of that sale on a B2B level. So I also would sort of end this reflection as follows. Whilst the B2C versus B2B discussion is a common one, I might argue, Joe, that maybe it's also a fictitious one, in the sense that businesses buy from people. So in the same way that in a B2C environment you are marketing to people, in a B2B environment, if you remove the corporate veil, which we often speak about, you are still selling to people within an organization, and you still need to understand the same trends and the same dynamics which occur in a B2C environment. Of course, the game is played out differently, contractually and volume-based, but has very similar dynamics, Joe. So the AI strategies have equal value.
Absolutely. We have some questions coming in. In fact, I want to tell the participants that, kind of keep on sending questions. We might run out of time at a point in time soon, but we'll be happy, to take questions even beyond the time we have in this webinar. We have one question from someone who sounded a bit concerned. Will AI be able to replace digital marketers in the future, marketing professionals?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. Let me put it this way. When a job can easily be described on a flowchart, on a piece of paper, then it's ready for automation, Joe. Any job which is easily described in a workflow typically means you could put it into a machine, into a little brain, which will learn that process and be able to automate it. A lot of digital marketing activities which exist today, especially in the PPC sector, are already done by AI tools and not humans. So yes, I fear that digital marketing is one of those roles which is already being transformed through the availability of AI. And I think my recommendation is this. For humans to retain validity within any economic process, they need to make sure that that contribution which they give has to do more with creative input, with the ability to imagine scenarios which typically an AI tool cannot. And in the digital marketing sector, that is the particular key. It is the creativity, it is the degree of emotional intelligence that humans can bring to the job, which AI tools will never be able to replace. But those parts of the job which are linear, which are repetitive, which are describable, those are the ones which we want AI to replace, because it could do it faster, it could do it 24/7, it could do it with a higher degree of accuracy, and it removes the repetitive nature of that particular task.
We have a number of other questions, but unfortunately, because of time, we're going to have to, answer them beyond the webinar. I have a quick question to kind of round up. Imagine an organization, a 100-person organization. They're really, engaged with what you've been talking about this morning. How should they start? Is it, like you said, it's a long-term, very transparent, invisible situation. So it's a long-term engagement, but from where do you start?
Yes. Joe, thank you. And I think it's an excellent concluding question, because this concept of how do I start, these principles to operationalize what we've said are absolutely critical. And in my answer, Joe, I'd like to provide some ideas which apply for a company of either size, whether you are a micro company, perhaps with less than 10 people involved, or even a large-scale entity. Well, I think there are 3 things that we need to focus on in terms of how do we start. And some of these are areas which I touched in my final slide. I think the first point is this idea of starting with small, quick wins, right? In the technology world, we call this the agile mindset. So don't try to automate everything. Don't try to start with your most complex process. We've been talking about customer service, but maybe that's too complex for many. Maybe it's procurement, which is easier. Maybe it is reconciliations, which are easier to start with. right? You start with the simplest process, which you know could be a quick win for your organization. So with a small iota of investment, you could champion the move into artificial intelligence. And as confidence builds around that quick win, then you expand into other processes, and slowly you will be changing the organization's speed in AI. Okay, the second recommendation that I would give on how to start, I think although AI is increasingly capable to help organizations which have no historical data, it's always better for an organization to have historical data, right? Historical data about its customers, its customer profiles, its customer needs, about price points, about competitors, about vendors. I think the more rich data you have, the better AI is going to be able to serve you, because it will look at those past historical trends and help you model the future prediction that you are likely to see. And we spoke quite a lot about prediction. So the second starting recommendation is, if you don't have data, make sure you start collating that in a machine-readable format, right? I think the third organization goes back to a lot of what we said about humanity in general, which is, I think, Joe, we need to start changing the culture. Change is not the problem. Resistance to change is often the problem. So I think the most important AI starting point I can give is that you need to have advocacy within your organization to make the entity understand that this is the way of the future. So we need to understand what are the reasons why people are creating a barrier to adopting AI. Are they afraid of it? Did we not explain it enough? Did we not have a champion project which we used to prove? Maybe we don't have an AI strategy and we need to put that into place. Maybe we don't understand the legal context of AI. So we need to understand where the pain, where the barrier to adoption is, and we need to create a culture of advocacy where AI becomes an important part of the business framework. So these 3 points: focus on quick wins, gather data, and change the culture are probably where organizations should start today.
Really interesting, Dr. JJ Gatt. Thanks for being with us. Essentially, as I said in the beginning, this is a series of webinars we have brought to you with the support of our strategic partners, HSBC, and the broadcasting by the support of Studio 7. We have 4 other webinars. Every week we're going to have one. Next week we have a very interesting session with Jess Camilleri on effective networking. We have the people from Namibia doing that session. We have digital marketing strategy coming up as well as supply chain and finance options. So thanks to all the participants for being here. Thanks finally to my colleagues at TradeMalta, especially Richard Sherry, who leads this project for TradeMalta, and we'll be with you again next week with the session on effective networking. Thanks.